He pushed the silver cart down the hallway, wheels squeaking against marble so polished it looked like glass. The sound echoed through the empty corridor of the Montgomery estate in Beverly Hills. Maria Santos kept her head down, dark hair pulled tight into a bun that made her scalp ache. The uniform they gave her was too stiff, scratching against her collarbone with every step. She smelled lemon cleaner and something floral, probably from the vase of white lilies sitting on the entry table. Rich people loved flowers that had no scent, she'd noticed, pretty but empty. Nobody told her about the boy, not during the interview when Mr. James Montgomery sat behind that massive oak desk, barely looking at her while his assistant rattled off instructions. Not when the head housekeeper, Margaret, showed her the supply closet and listed rules so long Maria's head spun. Clean the east wing before 9. Never touch Mr. Montgomery's study. Stay invisible. But nobody mentioned the kid. She first saw him on a Tuesday morning, third day on the job. Maria was dusting the second-floor landing when she heard it. A crash, glass breaking, then silence, the kind of silence that made your stomach clench. She froze, dustcloth in hand, heart hammering against her ribs. "Master Dillon!" Margaret's voice came sharp from downstairs. "Not again!" Maria peeked around the corner. A boy stood in the middle of the hallway, maybe 7 years old, 8 at most. Dark hair messy like he'd just rolled out of bed. He wore expensive pajamas, the kind with buttons down the front, but one sleeve was torn at the shoulder. At his feet lay the shattered remains of what looked like a crystal vase. Water pooled around his bare feet, roses scattered across the floor like casualties. The boy didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at the mess with eyes so empty they made Maria's chest hurt. Margaret appeared, her face red and tight. "What is wrong with you?" she hissed, grabbing the boy's arm. He didn't react, didn't pull away, just let himself be dragged like a puppet with cut strings. Maria pressed herself against the wall as they passed. The boy's eyes swept over her, through her, like she was made of air. That night, lying in the small room they'd given her above the garage, Maria stared at the ceiling and thought about those eyes. She'd seen eyes like that before, back in Guatemala, in the village where she grew up. Her cousin Rosa had eyes like that after the soldiers came through. Empty, hollow, like someone had reached in and scooped out everything that made her human. She pulled the thin blanket tighter and tried not to think about it. By the end of the first week, Maria had learned the boy's schedule without meaning to. He never came down for breakfast. Margaret brought his meals to his room on a tray, returned with it mostly untouched. Around 10, he'd appear in the hallway, always in those same button-up pajamas, always barefoot. He'd wander. Sometimes he'd stop and stare at a painting for 20 minutes. Sometimes he'd sit on the floor in the middle of a room and rock back and forth, until someone noticed and moved him. The staff avoided him like he carried something contagious. "Don't bother with Master Dillon," Margaret told her on Thursday, voice low as they folded towels in the linen closet. The smell of lavender detergent was so strong it made Maria's nose itch. "He's not right. Mr. Montgomery has tried everything. Doctors, therapists, special schools, nothing works. Boy's broken." Maria's hand stilled on a towel, soft and warm from the dryer. "Broken?" Margaret shrugged, her mouth a thin line. After Mrs. Montgomery died, the boy just shut down. Cancer took her slow. Dillon watched her waste away for 2 years. By the end, she didn't even recognize him. He was only 5 when she passed. Won't talk, won't play, screams bloody murder if anyone tries to touch him. We've had 12 nannies in 3 years, and last one quit after he bit her so hard she needed stitches. He bit her? Drew blood. Margaret's eyes glittered with something like satisfaction. "Mr. Montgomery's about ready to send him away, some facility upstate that deals with difficult children." The word facility landed in Maria's stomach like a stone. That afternoon, she was cleaning the library when she found him. Dillon sat in the corner between 2 tall bookshelves, knees pulled up to his chest, rocking. The carpet was thick under her knees as she knelt to pick up a book he must have knocked over. She could smell old paper and furniture polish. Her mother used to say libraries smelled like captured time. She glanced at the boy. He was humming, barely audible, the same 4 notes over and over. His eyes were fixed on nothing. Pupils dilated even though sunlight streamed through the windows. Maria picked up the book. "You like stories?" she asked, voice soft. He didn't respond. Didn't even blink. She sat down, back against the bookshelf, keeping a good 6 feet between them. The hardwood floor was cold through her uniform. She opened the book, a collection of fairy tales with illustrations so detailed you could count the scales on the dragon. "My mother used to tell me stories," Maria said, not looking at him. "Before bed, even when I was too old for it. I pretended to be annoyed, but I loved it." She traced her finger over an illustration of a castle. She always changed the endings, made them better. The humming stopped. Maria kept her eyes on the page, heart suddenly pounding. "Don't look at him. Don't move too fast." "There was this one story," she continued, voice steady, "about a boy who lost his voice. Everyone thought he was mute, but really he'd just forgotten how to use it. He kept it locked up inside because he was scared if he opened his mouth, all his sadness would come pouring out and drown everyone." Silence. Then, so quiet she almost missed it, a sound, like a sharp intake of breath. Maria closed the book slowly. "I have to finish cleaning now," she said, standing up. Her knees protested, pins and needles running down her legs. "But I'll be back tomorrow, if you want." She didn't wait for a response, didn't turn around, just walked out, hands trembling slightly as she pushed her cart down the hall. Behind her, in the library, Dylan uncurled just a fraction. His eyes followed the door she'd disappeared through. For the first time in 3 years, something flickered in those empty eyes. Interest. James Montgomery sat in his home office, the kind of room that screamed power. Dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a desk the size of a small car. He held a glass of scotch, amber liquid catching the light from the setting sun. The taste was smoky and sharp on his tongue, burning all the way down. On his laptop screen sat a folder. Psychological evaluation, the label read. Inside, pages and pages of clinical observations, diagnoses, recommendations. He'd read it 6 times already. Patient exhibits severe selective mutism and dissociative behaviors following maternal death. Recommends long-term residential treatment. Current home environment may be exacerbating symptoms. Removal from father figure advised to prevent unhealthy attachment patterns. James took another drink. The walls of his beautiful office seemed to close in. He could hear the clock on his desk ticking, each second loud as a gunshot. His phone buzzed. Another email from his business partner, Richard Chen. They were in the middle of a merger worth $800 million. The biggest deal of James's career. And he was distracted. Everyone could see it. Yesterday, during a video conference with investors from Tokyo, Dylan had started screaming in the background. James had to mute himself, excuse himself, leave the meeting while Margaret dealt with it. When he came back, he could see the doubt in their faces. Can we trust someone who can't even control his own household? He set down the scotch glass so hard it cracked. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. Dylan, his son, with Melissa's dark hair and his green eyes. The child who used to climb into his lap during boring conference calls and demand attention, who used to bring him terrible drawings and expect them to be hung on the office wall immediately. That boy was gone. In his place was a ghost, a hollow shell that looked like his son but had nothing inside. The cancer had been brutal. Stage 4 breast cancer. They'd tried everything. Chemo, radiation, experimental treatments. Melissa had fought for 2 years, her body getting thinner, her hair falling out, her skin turning gray. Dylan had been 3 when the diagnosis came, 5 when she died, old enough to understand his mother was sick, old enough to watch her fade, too young to process it. James pressed his palms against his eyes. Not now, not now. He'd tried everything after Melissa died. Dr. Harrison from UCLA Medical Center, the child psychologist with credentials covering an entire wall. Dylan had sat through 8 sessions without saying a word, just staring at the toys he was supposed to play with. Dr. Harrison had finally pulled James aside and said, "Mr. Montgomery, your son needs intensive intervention, more than I can provide weekly. He needs a residential program." Then came Dr. Kim, who specialized in childhood trauma. Dylan had screamed the moment she walked into the room. Not words, just sound. High-pitched and agonizing like an animal caught in a trap. Dr. Kim left after 15 minutes and sent him a bill for the full session. The nannies were worse. Professional, expensive, highly recommended. Each one lasted less than 6 weeks. Dylan ignored them, destroyed their belongings, hurt himself if they tried to force interaction. One nanny found him trying to cut his own arm with scissors, dragging the blade across his skin while she screamed for him to stop. Another woke up to find her suitcase thrown in the pool, all her clothes ruined. Margaret said he was manipulative, a spoiled brat acting out for attention. James wasn't sure. He thought maybe his son was just drowning, and nobody knew how to throw him a rope. The facility upstate sent glossy brochures, Sunrise Hills Residential Treatment Center, where children find hope again. Photos of smiling kids in art therapy, walking through gardens, playing basketball. It looked peaceful, safe. It looked like giving up. James poured more scotch. The bottle was half empty. He didn't remember drinking that much. His phone buzzed again, this time a text from Richard. Board meeting moved to Friday. Investors want to discuss leadership stability. James, we need to talk about your situation. Your situation. Code for your broken kid is making you look weak. James deleted the text. He stood up, legs unsteady, and walked to the window. Below, the pool glowed turquoise in the evening light. The garden lights were on, making everything look soft and perfect and fake. He thought about that folder. That recommendation. Removal from father figure advised. They wanted him to send Dylan away, said it would be better for both of them. James could focus on his business, his life. Dylan could get the help he needed from professionals, but James remembered holding his son in the hospital the night Melissa died. Dylan had been so small, trembling against his chest, making sounds like wounded animal. James had whispered promises. I'll take care of you. I'll never leave you. We'll get through this together. Lies, all lies, because he didn't know how to take care of Dylan, didn't know how to fix him, didn't even know how to talk to him anymore. His reflection stared back at him from the window. 42 years old, but looking 50. Dark circles under his eyes, hair graying at the temples, like someone who'd aged a decade in 3 years. I'm sorry, Melissa, he whispered to the glass. I don't know what to do. The house was silent. No answer came. Maria woke up at 5 in the morning like always. The room above the garage was small, just a bed and a dresser and a tiny bathroom. Through the window, she could see the main house, all lit up even though nobody was awake. Rich people left lights on all night like they were afraid of the dark. She washed her face with cold water, the shock of it making her gasp. Her reflection looked back at her from the cracked mirror. 32 years old, dark circles under her eyes, hands rough from work, scars on her forearms from the hot oil at the restaurant where she'd worked before this, burns that had faded to white lines but would never completely disappear. She dressed in her uniform, pulled her hair back, and walked down the narrow stairs. The air outside was cool and damp, carrying the smell of jasmine from the bushes lining the driveway. The gardeners had planted them last month. She could see the dark earth around their roots, still fresh. In the main house kitchen, Margaret was already making coffee. The machine hissed and gurgled, filling the room with a bitter, burnt smell that Maria had never gotten used to. Early again, Margaret said without looking up. You don't have to start until 6. Can't sleep, Maria said. It was true. Her mind kept spinning, thinking about that boy in the library, the way he'd stopped humming when she talked, the sound of his breath catching. Margaret handed her a mug. The ceramic was warm against Maria's palms. You're too soft, the older woman said. This job, you need to be hard. Do what you're told. Don't think too much. Don't care too much. Maria sipped the coffee. It was strong enough to strip paint. Why do you stay if you hate it so much? Margaret's face went still. For a moment, Maria thought she'd crossed a line. Then the housekeeper shrugged. The money's good. Mr. Montgomery pays well, and it's easy work if you follow the rules. What about Dylan? What about him? Don't you feel bad for him? Margaret set down her mug hard enough that coffee sloshed over the rim. Brown liquid spread across the white counter like blood. Feeling bad doesn't pay the bills. That boy is not my problem. He's not your problem either. You're here to clean, Maria. Not to play therapist. She grabbed a towel and wiped up the spill, movements sharp and angry. Besides, you get attached, you'll just get hurt. Mr. Montgomery's sending him away. Everyone knows it. It's just a matter of time. The words sat heavy in Maria's chest. She drank more coffee, even though it tasted like ashes. At 6:30, she was cleaning the downstairs bathroom when she heard the scream. High-pitched, terrified, coming from upstairs, Maria dropped her sponge into the sink with a wet slap and ran. Her shoes squeaked on the marble floor. She took the stairs 2 at a time, heart hammering. The scream came again, and this time she could tell it was coming from Dylan's room. She burst through the door. The boy was on the floor, tangled in his bedsheets, thrashing. His face was red, mouth open, screaming. But it wasn't a tantrum. His eyes were closed. He was asleep. Nightmare. Margaret appeared behind her, breathing hard, hand pressed to her chest. Christ! Again! Maria moved without thinking. She knelt beside Dylan, careful not to touch him. Dylan, she said, voice low and calm. Dylan, you're okay. You're safe. It's just a dream. He screamed louder, arms flailing. His fist caught the edge of the bedside table. The crack of knuckles against wood made Maria flinch. She smelled his fear, sharp and sour like vinegar. Dylan. Firmer now. Wake up. His eyes flew open, wild, unfocused. He was still trapped between sleep and waking, seeing things that weren't there. His pupils were huge, almost swallowing the green of his irises. Maria started humming. She didn't plan it. It just came out, the lullaby her mother used to sing. 4 simple notes. Repeated over and over, the same notes she'd heard Dylan humming in the library. His breathing changed, slowed. The wildness left his eyes. She kept humming, hands resting on her knees, not reaching for him. Just there, steady. The morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and golden. Dylan blinked, once, twice. His eyes focused on her face. They stared at each other for a long moment. Maria could see his chest rising and falling too fast, could see the sweat beading on his forehead. You're okay, she whispered. Just a bad dream. He opened his mouth, closed it. Then, so quiet she almost didn't hear it, he whispered, Mom? Maria's breath caught. Margaret gasped behind her. Dylan's eyes filled with tears. I want my mom. The words hung in the air like smoke. Maria felt something crack in her chest. I know, she whispered. I know you do. Dylan started crying. Not loud, just tears streaming down his face, his small body shaking. He didn't make a sound except for his ragged breathing. Maria wanted to hold him. Every instinct screamed to pull him close, comfort him. But she knew better, so she just sat there, humming softly, letting him cry. After a long moment, Dylan's hand moved. Slowly, hesitantly. His fingers stretched toward her. Maria stayed still. Let him come to her. His hand touched hers, just the fingertips, the lightest pressure. I'm here, Maria whispered. You're not alone. Behind them, Margaret pressed her hand to her mouth. She turned and left the room quickly, footsteps echoing down the hall. James Montgomery came home early that day. Maria heard his car in the driveway at 2 p.m, hours before he usually returned from the office. The engine cut off. A door slammed. Then silence. She was in the kitchen, helping Margaret prep vegetables for dinner. The smell of onions made her eyes water. She wiped them on her sleeve just as James walked in. He looked terrible. His suit was wrinkled, tie loosened. His hair stood up like he'd been running his hands through it. Dark stubble shadowed his jaw. Where is he? James's voice was rough. Where's Dylan? Margaret appeared from the pantry, flour dusting her apron. In his room, sir. He's been quiet since this morning. Quiet, James laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. He still held his briefcase, knuckles white around the handle. Dr. Harrison just called me, said he received an interesting call from his colleague. Apparently my son spoke today. For the first time in 3 years, Dylan spoke, and nobody thought to tell me? Maria stepped forward, heart sinking. She hadn't thought, hadn't considered. She'd just been so focused on helping that she forgot about the consequences. James's eyes landed on her, sharp, assessing. You, the new maid, Maria? Yes, sir. Margaret says you were there, when Dylan woke up from his nightmare, when he spoke. Maria nodded, throat tight. The onion smell was overwhelming now, mixing with the coffee smell still lingering from the morning. James walked closer. His cologne was expensive, something woody and clean, but underneath it she could smell his sweat. What did you do? Nothing, sir. He was scared. I hummed. That's all. You hummed. James's voice was flat. You hummed and my son spoke for the first time in 3 years. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Sorry? James's voice cracked. His briefcase hit the floor with a thud. You're sorry? Maria didn't know what to say. She stood there, hands clasped in front of her, waiting for the yelling to start, waiting to be fired. Instead, James sat down at the kitchen table, just collapsed into the chair like his legs gave out. He put his face in his hands. His shoulders shook once, twice. "I've spent $300,000 on specialists," he said, voice muffled. "I've tried everything, and a housekeeper who's been here less than 2 weeks does what none of them could do." The silence stretched. Maria could hear the refrigerator humming, could smell the chicken Margaret had in the oven, the scent of rosemary and garlic filling the kitchen. Finally, James looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. "Do it again." "Sir? Whatever you did, do it again." He stood up, straightening his tie with trembling hands. "I don't care if you're qualified. I don't care what anyone thinks. If you can reach him, if you can help him, then I'm paying you to do exactly that." Maria's head spun. "But I'm just a maid. I don't know anything about— Do you have children?" The question hit like a fist. Maria's hands clenched, her fingernails dug into her palms. "No, sir." "But you know what it's like to lose someone." It wasn't a question. James's eyes were sharp despite the exhaustion. "I can see it. The way you look at Dylan. You recognize him because you've been there. In that dark place where nothing makes sense and everyone is trying to fix you when you just want to disappear." Maria's throat burned. She thought about her mother, about the night the soldiers came, about hiding in the closet while her mother screamed, about the silence after, the terrible, final silence. "Yes," she whispered. "I know what that's like." James nodded. "Then help him, please. I'll double your salary, triple it, whatever you want, just—" His voice broke. "Just bring my son back." The board meeting happened on Monday, like clockwork. James sat at the head of the table in the conference room of Montgomery Enterprises, looking at 8 faces that used to respect him. Now they just looked concerned, skeptical. Richard Chen, his business partner and COO, sat to his right. 45 years old, perfectly styled black hair, designer glasses that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He smiled at James, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "James," he said, voice smooth as silk, "thank you for joining us. We know how busy you've been." Code for, "We know you've been neglecting your duties." James opened his folder, pulled out the quarterly reports. His hands were steady. He'd practiced this. "Revenue is up 12% from last year. We've secured the merger with Tanaka Industries. The Tokyo office—" "Yes, yes," Richard interrupted, waving his hand. "The numbers look good. But James, we're concerned about sustainability, about leadership. You've missed 6 meetings in the last 2 months, important meetings." "My son, we understand you're going through a difficult time," another board member cut in. Stephen Walsh, corporate lawyer. Shark in a suit. "But Montgomery Enterprises needs a CEO who can be present, who can make decisions without personal complications clouding their judgment." James's fingers tightened on the folder. The paper crinkled under his grip. "My personal life has not affected my ability to—" "Hasn't it?" Richard leaned forward, elbows on the table. The overhead lights reflected off his glasses, hiding his eyes. "James, we all loved Melissa. She was an incredible woman, a visionary. And we all want what's best for you and Dylan. But maybe right now, what's best is for you to take a step back. Let someone else handle the company while you focus on your family." The room went silent. Everyone was looking at him, waiting. The air conditioning hummed overhead. James could smell someone's coffee, dark and bitter. He felt something cold settle in his chest. He met Richard's eyes, saw the calculation there, the patience, the hunger. Richard had been planning this, probably for months, maybe years, waiting for the right moment to strike. Melissa's death had been a tragedy. Dylan's breakdown had been unfortunate. But for Richard, they were opportunities. "Are you suggesting I step down?" James asked, voice deadly quiet. Richard spread his hands, palms up, reasonable, understanding. "Not permanently, just a temporary leave of absence until things are more stable at home." "And who would take over in my absence?" "Well," Richard sat back, trying to look modest, failing. "I've been helping out quite a bit already. It would be a natural transition. And you know I have the company's best interests at heart." James wanted to throw the folder at his head, wanted to flip the table, wanted to scream. But he'd learned years ago that men in business couldn't afford to show emotion either. It was always used against them. Unstable. Emotional. Weak. He closed the folder carefully, stood up. His chair scraped against the floor, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "Thank you for your concern," he he said, each word precise and cold. "But I'm not stepping down. I'll see you all next week." He walked out before anyone could respond, footsteps echoing on the polished floor, back straight, head high. In the elevator alone, he let himself shake. His hands trembled as he pressed the button for the parking garage. The elevator descended, his stomach lurching with the motion. Richard was trying to take his company, the company he and Melissa had built together from nothing. Starting in their apartment 20 years ago, working 18-hour days, surviving on ramen and ambition. Everything they'd sacrificed, everything they'd achieved, Richard wanted to take it all. And he was using Dylan as ammunition, using James's grief, his struggles, his son's pain as weapons. The worst part? It might work, because James was failing as a CEO, failing as a father, failing at everything that mattered. The elevator doors opened to the parking garage, concrete and exhaust fumes. James walked to his car, got in, and sat there in the dark. His hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. The leather creaked under his grip. He thought about Dylan, about the call he'd gotten from Margaret this afternoon. The boy had eaten lunch today. Actually eaten. Maria had sat with him in his room, not talking, just folding laundry, and Dylan had picked up his fork and eaten half a sandwich. Half a sandwich. Such a small thing. Such a massive victory. James started the car. The engine roared to life, vibrating through his body. He needed to get home, needed to see his son, needed to figure out how to save everything before it all fell apart. Because if he lost the company, he lost everything. The house, Dylan's care, the ability to fight for his son. Richard knew that, was counting on it. James drove out of the garage into the bright Los Angeles afternoon. The sun was too bright, making his eyes water. Or maybe that was something else. Maria sat on the floor of Dylan's room, sorting blocks by color. She didn't ask him to help, didn't expect him to, just worked quietly, the soft click of plastic on plastic filling the silence. The room smelled like boy, that specific scent of sleep and shampoo and something indefinable, clean laundry and old books and the faint smell of the chocolate milk Margaret had brought up earlier. Dylan sat on his bed, knees pulled up, watching her. He hadn't spoken again since that morning, but he watched, and that was something. "My mother used to make me sort beans," Maria said, not looking at him. "Black beans, red beans, white beans, all mixed up in a big bowl. She said it taught patience. I hated it, thought it was boring." She smiled, placing a blue block on the blue pile. "But now I think maybe she just needed me to sit still for a while. Be quiet. She worked so hard, 3 jobs. She was always tired." She could feel Dylan's eyes on her, intent, listening. "She died when I was 15, Maria continued, voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "Pneumonia. We didn't have money for doctors. By the time we got her to the hospital, it was too late." She picked up a red block, turned it over in her hands. The plastic was smooth, warm from her touch. "I was so angry. At her, at God, at everyone. I didn't talk to anyone for 6 months. The bed creaked. She glanced up. Dylan had moved closer to the edge, feet dangling. His toes barely touched the floor. "People kept telling me I had to move on, had to be strong, but I didn't want to be strong. I wanted my mother." Maria set down the block. "And you know what? That was okay. Being sad was okay." "Everyone wants me to be better," Dylan whispered. Maria's breath caught. She forced herself to keep sorting blocks, not making a big deal of it. Red, blue, yellow, green. "Yeah? They look at me like I'm broken. Do you feel broken?" Silence. Then, "I feel empty." Maria nodded slowly. "Empty is scary, but empty can also be peaceful, like the quiet before sunrise." "I don't want peaceful. I want my mom back." His voice cracked on the last word. "I know." She finally looked at him. His eyes were red-rimmed, face pale. A small bruise was forming on his knuckle from where he'd hit the bedside table. "You can't have her back, and that's the most unfair thing in the world. But you're still here. And being here, feeling all this hurt, it means you loved her. It means she mattered." Dylan's face crumpled. "It hurts so much." "Yes. When does it stop?" "I don't know if it ever stops completely," Maria said honestly. "But it gets different, softer, like a bruise that's healing, still tender when you press on it, but not the sharp pain it was before. He climbed down from the bed, moved slowly, like his body was heavy, sat on the floor across from her, the pile of blocks between them. He picked up a yellow block, stared at it for a long moment, then placed it carefully on the yellow pile. They sorted in silence: blue, red, yellow, green. The afternoon light shifted across the floor, warm and golden. Outside, Maria could hear birds singing, a lawnmower starting up somewhere down the street. Normal sounds, life continuing despite everything. When they finished, Dylan looked at the neat piles. It's organized now. Yes. But it's still just blocks. Maria smiled. Yeah, it is. He almost smiled back. Almost. His mouth twitched at the corners. Then his face went serious again. Maria? Yeah? Do you think my mom would be mad at me? For not talking? For being like this? The question pierced straight through Maria's chest. She put down the block she was holding. No, she said firmly. No, Dylan, your mom would understand. She'd want you to take all the time you need. How do you know? Because that's what real love is. It doesn't demand, it doesn't rush, it just waits patiently until you're ready. Dylan was quiet for a long time. Then, I miss her smell. She smelled like flowers and vanilla, and now I can't remember it anymore. I try to remember and it's gone. Maria's throat tightened. That's normal. It happens. I don't want to forget. You won't forget. Not the important stuff, how she made you feel, how she laughed, the way she looked at you. She turned to look at him fully. Those things don't fade. They become part of who you are. Dylan looked down at his hands. Small hands, child's hands that had touched his dying mother. That had held her hand as she slipped away. Will you tell me a story? He asked quietly. Like you told about the boy who lost his voice? Sure. What kind of story? One with a sad part that gets better. Maria thought for a moment. Then she began. Once there was a bird who forgot how to sing. James found them 2 hours later. He'd come home early, needing to see Dylan, needing to see with his own eyes that his son had actually spoken. He'd checked Dylan's room first, found it empty. Panic had started to rise in his chest. Then he'd heard voices. Soft, coming from the playroom down the hall. He walked quietly to the doorway, stopped, stared. Maria and Dylan sat on the floor, surrounded by building blocks, but they weren't playing, they were talking, actually talking. And then what happened to the bird? Dylan asked. His voice was quiet but clear. Well, Maria said, the bird met a friend. Another bird who also couldn't sing, and they realized that sometimes you don't need to sing to have a voice. Sometimes just being there, side by side, is enough. I like that story. Yeah? Yeah, because it means the bird wasn't alone anymore. Maria smiled. Exactly. James's vision blurred. He pressed his hand against the doorframe, needing the support. His son, his boy, talking. Actually, talking. Not forced. Not screaming, just talking. Like a normal kid. Dylan looked up, saw him, his whole body tensed. Hey, buddy, James said, voice rough. He cleared his throat. What are you two up to? Dylan looked at Maria, then back at his father. Building. One word. But it was directed at him. At James. His son had spoken to him for the first time in 3 years. James's knees nearly gave out. He walked into the room, moved slowly, carefully. Sat down on the floor near them, but not too close. Can I help? Dylan hesitated, looked at Maria again. It's okay, she said softly. Your dad's good at building things. That's what he does, right? Builds companies? Dylan considered this. Then he pushed a pile of blocks toward James. You can do the walls. James picked up a block. His hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. Walls. Okay, I can do that. They built in silence. Dylan telling them where pieces should go, Maria following instructions, James trying not to cry every time his son spoke. Outside, the sun set slowly, painting the sky orange and pink. Birds sang their evening songs. The house settled into comfortable quiet. For the first time in 3 years, James felt something like hope. The change was gradual. Over the next 2 weeks, Dylan started coming out of his room more, not much, but enough. He'd find Maria wherever she was working and just be there. Silent, watching. She'd talk to him while she cleaned, tell him about Guatemala, about her grandmother who raised chickens and could predict the weather by watching them, about her brother who was terrible at soccer but tried anyway, about the time she got lost in the market and was found 3 hours later eating mangoes with a street vendor. Dylan never talked back much, but he listened. His eyes followed her, and sometimes, when she said something funny, his mouth would twitch, not a smile, but close. Margaret noticed. Of course she noticed. "You're making things worse," she said one afternoon, cornering Maria in the supply closet. The smell of bleach was overwhelming, making Maria's eyes water. Chemical and sharp. "The boy's getting attached. What happens when you leave? Or when Mr. Montgomery changes his mind? He'll break all over again." "Maybe," Maria said, "but maybe right now he just needs someone who doesn't expect anything from him." "You're playing with fire." Maria met her eyes, saw the genuine concern there underneath the gruffness. Better than letting him freeze. Margaret shook her head and left, but Maria saw her pause at the door, saw her look back. Maybe Margaret wasn't as hard as she pretended. That night, Maria was woken by a knock on her door. She jolted up, heart racing. The digital clock on her nightstand said 2:14 a.m., red numbers glowing in the dark. She pulled on her robe and opened the door. Dylan stood there in his pajamas, barefoot, shivering. The hallway light was behind him, casting a shadow long across her floor. "Nightmare?" Maria asked. He nodded. She wanted to hug him, touch his shoulder, something, but she knew better. "Want to come in?" Another nod. She opened the door wider. He walked in, looking around the small room like he'd entered another planet. His eyes took in everything. The simple furniture, the cross on the wall, the photo of her mother on the dresser. She turned on the lamp by her bed. Warm light filled the space, pushing back the shadows. "You can sit on the bed if you want," Maria said. "I'll make tea, my mother's recipe, good for bad dreams." He climbed onto her bed, pulling his knees up again. That position that made him look so small, so young, so breakable. Maria heated water on the hot plate she kept in the corner, added chamomile and honey. The smell filled the room, sweet and herbal. Steam rose in lazy curls. She brought him the cup, wrapping his small hands around it. "Careful, it's hot." He sipped, made a face. "It's sweet. My mother said nightmares are bitter, so the tea has to be sweet to balance it out." Dylan considered this, took another sip. The steam fogged his face. "Did it work for you?" "Sometimes." Maria sat on the floor, back against the bed. The carpet was rough under her legs. "Sometimes I still had nightmares, but the tea made me feel like my mother was there, like she was protecting me even though she was gone." "I can't remember her voice anymore," Dylan whispered. "My mom's voice. I try to remember and it's fuzzy, like static on the TV when the cable goes out." Maria's throat tightened. She stared at the wall, giving him space. "That's normal. It happens to everyone. I don't want to forget." "You won't forget. Not the important stuff. How she made you feel. How she laughed, the way she looked at you." She turned to look up at him. "Those things don't fade. They live in your bones." Dylan was quiet for a long time. The hot plate clicked off. The room settled into warm silence. Then, "Will you tell me a story? Like you told that one about the bird who forgot how to sing?" "Sure. What kind of story?" "One with a sad beginning that gets better." Maria thought. Then she began. "Once there was a lighthouse keeper who lost his light. James found them the next morning. He'd gotten worried when Dylan wasn't in his bed, had started searching the house in a panic, and then he'd checked Maria's room above the garage and found them both asleep. Maria on the floor, wrapped in a blanket, Dylan on the bed, Maria's pillow under his head, the empty teacup on the nightstand. He stood in the doorway, hand over his mouth, his son, sleeping peacefully. For the first time in 3 years, he looked at peace. His face was relaxed, no tension in his jaw, no nightmares chasing him. James took a photo on his phone, then he quietly closed the door and went back to the house. In his office, he made 3 phone calls. First, to his lawyer, second, to the accountant, third, to the head of HR at Montgomery Enterprises. Richard Chen wanted to take his company? He'd have to go through hell first. By noon, he'd restructured his role, hired a president to handle day-to-day operations, delegated everything that could be delegated, freed up his schedule to be home by 4 every single day. If he was going to fight for his company, fine, but he was going to fight for his son first. At 4:30, he walked into the kitchen. Margaret was preparing dinner, the smell of garlic and rosemary making James's stomach rumble. His mouth watered. He realized he hadn't eaten lunch. "Where's Dylan?" James asked. "In the garden with Maria." "They've been out there for an hour." James walked to the window. In the garden, under the oak tree, Maria and Dylan sat on the grass. The evening light was golden, soft. Maria was showing him something, her hands moving as she talked. Dylan watched, nodded, then tried to copy what she'd done. They were braiding grass, such a simple thing. Sitting in the grass, braiding grass, sunlight filtering through the leaves, the smell of earth and growing things. Dylan laughed. The sound hit James like a physical blow. He grabbed the counter to steady himself. Dylan laughed, a real laugh, bright and clear and beautiful. The sound he thought he'd never hear again. Margaret appeared beside him. She wiped her hands on her apron, flour dusting her fingers. "Well," the housekeeper said quietly, "I'll be damned." James couldn't speak, could barely breathe. He just watched his son, his beautiful boy, laughing in the garden with a woman who'd been here less than a month, a woman who'd done what armies of professionals couldn't do. His phone buzzed, a text from Richard. "Board meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m., be there." James looked at the phone, at the text, at the implied threat. Then he looked back at his son, at Dylan, who was trying to teach Maria how to make a grass bracelet, his small hands moving patiently when she got it wrong. He knew what he had to do. He texted back, "See you there." Then he walked outside to join them, but not everyone was happy about the change. Richard Chen heard about it through his secretary, who'd heard it from someone who'd heard it from someone else. The maid was now some kind of private companion to the Montgomery kid, getting paid a fortune, living in the house. He sat in his office, fingers drumming on his desk. The sound was rhythmic, steady, like a countdown. This was inconvenient. James was supposed to be falling apart, supposed to be so overwhelmed he'd beg for help, for someone to take over. Richard had been so patient, so careful, positioning himself as the logical successor, the steady hand to guide the company through this difficult transition. But if James got his shit together, if his kid started improving, he'd fight back. And James still had majority shares, barely. 51% to Richard's 49, but enough. He picked up his phone, dialed a number, waited through 3 rings. "It's me," he said when someone answered. "We need to accelerate the timeline. Yes, I don't care what it takes. Just make sure James Montgomery is too busy dealing with his personal life to notice what's happening at the company." "What exactly did you have in mind?" Richard smiled, cold, calculating. "Immigration status, the maid, Maria Santos. I want to know everything about her, every paper she's filed, every form, every stamp. Find something we can use. And if her paperwork's clean, then make it dirty." He hung up, leaned back in his chair. The leather creaked under his weight. Through his office window he could see the Los Angeles skyline. All those buildings, all that power, all of it within reach. One way or another, Montgomery Enterprises would be his. He'd worked too hard, waited too long, kissed too much ass to let a widower and his broken kid stand in his way. James had built this company with Melissa, but Melissa was dead, and James was weak, distracted, vulnerable, perfect. Maria didn't know about Richard Chen's plans, didn't know about the board meetings or the corporate maneuvering or the danger circling James like sharks in dark water. She just knew that Dylan was getting better. Slowly, so slowly, but better. He started talking more, not full conversations, just sentences here and there, comments, observations. "The sky is pretty today. I like this soup. Can we go to the garden again?" Small things. But to Maria, they were everything. One afternoon, 3 months after she'd started, Dylan asked her a question that made her freeze. They were in the library, the place where this had all started. Maria was reading to him, one of those fairy tales with the detailed illustrations. The book smelled old, pages yellowed with age. He interrupted her mid-sentence. "Why are you nice to me?" Maria looked up from the book. "What do you mean?" "Everyone else. They're nice because they have to be. Or because Dad pays them. But you're different." His blue eyes were serious, searching her face. "Why?" Maria closed the book carefully, buying time to think. The leather cover was smooth under her hands. "How do you explain to an 8-year-old that you saw yourself in him? That you recognized the shape of his grief because it matched yours?" "Because I was you once," she said finally. "Lost, angry, sad, and nobody saw me. They just saw the mess I was making, the problems I was causing. Nobody looked at me and thought, she's in pain. They just thought, she's difficult." "You're not difficult," Dylan said quietly. "I was. For a long time." Maria smiled. "But someone helped me. A teacher at my school. She didn't try to fix me. She just sat with me. Let me be angry and sad without telling me I shouldn't feel that way." "What happened to her?" "I don't know. I left Guatemala when I was 17. Came to America. Never saw her again." Maria's voice went soft. "But I think about her a lot. How she saved my life without even knowing it." Dylan was quiet. Then, "Am I saving your life?" The question hit her like a truck. Maria's eyes burned. She pressed her palm against her chest, feeling her heart hammering. "Yeah," she whispered. "Yeah, you are." "How?" "Because you remind me that pain doesn't last forever, that people can heal, that there's still good in the world even when it feels like everything is dark." Dylan moved closer, hesitated. Then, slowly, carefully, he leaned against her shoulder. Maria didn't move, didn't breathe. Just let him rest there, this small, broken boy who was learning to be whole again. She could feel his warmth through her sleeve, could feel his breathing, slow and steady. Outside, the sun shone through the windows. Birds sang in the oak tree. The house was quiet and warm and, for just this moment, safe. But safety is a fragile thing. 3 days later, Margaret answered the door to find a man in an expensive suit, late 40s, briefcase in hand, smile that didn't reach his eyes. The smell of expensive cologne wafted through the door, mixing with the scent of Margaret's lemon cleaner. "Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Philip Saunders from Child Protective Services. I'm here to do a welfare check on Dylan Montgomery." Margaret's stomach dropped. Her hand tightened on the doorknob. Mr. Montgomery isn't home." "That's fine. I can wait." He walked past her into the house like he owned it. His shoes clicked on the marble floor. Expensive shoes, too expensive for a CPS worker. "Where's the child?" "In the garden with his companion." Dr. Saunders raised an eyebrow. "Companion? You mean the housekeeper I've been told about, Maria Santos? She's not just a housekeeper anymore. She's unqualified to provide mental health care to a traumatized child." "Yes, I'm aware." He set down his briefcase. The sound echoed in the empty foyer. "Please take me to them." Margaret wanted to refuse, wanted to slam the door in his face, but she couldn't. This was CPS. They had power, authority, the kind of authority that could take a child away from his home. She led him to the garden, her heart pounding with each step. Maria and Dylan were by the fountain. Dylan was trailing his fingers in the water, watching the ripples spread across the surface. The sun caught the water, making it sparkle. Maria sat beside him, not talking, just present. A book lay open on the grass beside them. "Dylan Montgomery?" Dr. Saunders called out. His voice was sharp, official. Dylan's head snapped up. His whole body went rigid. The color drained from his face. Maria stood immediately, positioning herself between Dylan and this stranger. "Who are you?" "Dr. Philip Saunders, CPS. I'm here to evaluate Dylan's living situation." He pulled out a clipboard, already making notes. The pen scratched against paper. "And you are?" "Maria Santos." "The maid." "Companion," Maria corrected, voice hard. "Right." He wrote something down. More scratching. The sound set Maria's teeth on edge. "How long have you been working with Dylan?" 3 months. And you have what qualifications? Psychology degree? Social work license? Any formal training in child development or trauma therapy? No, but so you're an unlicensed, unqualified individual providing mental health services to a vulnerable child. He turned to Dylan, smile fixed on his face. Fake. Predatory. Hello, Dylan. I'd like to ask you some questions. Dylan shook his head, eyes wide, backing up. His foot slipped on the wet grass. It's okay, Dr. Saunders said in that fake, gentle voice adults use when they're trying to seem trustworthy. I'm here to help, to make sure you're safe. No, Dylan whispered. Dylan. No! Louder now, panicked. His breathing was coming fast, too fast. He grabbed Maria's hand, his palm sweaty against hers. Make him go away. Maria squeezed his hand. Dr. Saunders, you're scaring him. Maybe if you give us a minute. I'm a trained professional, Miss Santos. I know how to handle traumatized children. What I don't understand is why an untrained immigrant is being allowed to interfere with his treatment. His voice dripped with condescension. You've created an unhealthy dependency. That's textbook emotional manipulation. I'm not manipulating anyone. I'm helping him. By isolating him, keeping him dependent on you, that's not healthy, Miss Santos. That's dangerous. He took a step closer. Dylan, come here. Let's talk. Away from Miss Santos. You need to leave, Maria said firmly. She could feel Dylan trembling behind her, could hear his breath coming in short gasps. Dr. Saunders laughed, actually laughed. The sound was sharp and ugly. I'm from CPS. I'm not going anywhere until I've completed my evaluation. He looked at Dylan. Come here, son. Let's talk. I won't hurt you. Don't touch him, Maria warned. But Dr. Saunders was already reaching for Dylan's arm. His hand shot out, fingers grasping. Dylan screamed, high and piercing and full of terror. He wrenched away from Dr. Saunders, stumbling backward. His foot caught on the edge of the fountain. He fell. The crack of his head hitting stone echoed through the garden. Everything stopped. Dylan lay motionless on the grass, a thin line of blood trickling from his temple. The red stood out stark against his pale skin, against the green grass. Maria's world narrowed to that small body, that blood, that silence. She was on her knees beside him in seconds. Her knees hit the grass hard enough to hurt. Dylan, Dylan, baby, open your eyes. Nothing. Call 911, she screamed at Margaret. Dr. Saunders stood there, clipboard forgotten, face pale. His hand was still outstretched, frozen in mid-reach. He just pulled away. I didn't mean... Get out, Maria snarled. Get the fuck out of here. Behind them, Margaret was already on the phone, hand shaking as she dialed. We need an ambulance. A child fell. He's unconscious. There's blood. Please hurry. Maria pressed her hand against Dylan's head, trying to stop the bleeding. Her hands were shaking. Blood seeped between her fingers, warm and wet. Stay with me, she whispered. Come on, baby. Open your eyes, please. His eyelids fluttered, opened, unfocused, pupils different sizes. Maria. His voice was so small, so scared. I'm here. You're okay. You're going to be okay. My head hurts. I know. Help is coming. Just stay awake. Stay with me. Evan started to cry. I'm scared. I know, me too, but I'm right here. I'm not leaving. I'm never leaving. In the distance, sirens wailed, getting closer. The ambulance arrived 12 minutes later. They loaded Dylan onto a stretcher, neck brace in place. Maria climbed in with him, holding his hand. Blood stained her uniform, stained her hands. As the ambulance pulled away, she saw Dr. Saunders standing in the driveway, looking lost, looking guilty. And she saw something else. A black sedan parked down the street, tinted windows. Engine running. A man in the driver's seat, camera pointed at them. Someone was watching, documenting. This wasn't an accident. This was a setup. At the hospital, they took Dylan for a CT scan. Possible concussion, the doctor said. We need to make sure there's no internal bleeding. Could be a skull fracture. Maria sat in the waiting room, hands still stained with Dylan's blood. She stared at them, brown skin marked with red. She should wash them, but she couldn't make herself move. James arrived 30 minutes later. He burst through the emergency room doors still in his suit, tie askew. His eyes were wild, terrified. He grabbed Maria by the shoulders. What happened? Is he okay? Where is he? Maria told him. About Dr. Saunders, about CPS, about how Dylan had fallen trying to get away from him. The words came out flat, mechanical, like someone else was speaking. James's face went white, then red, then cold. His hands dropped from her shoulders. "Who called CPS?" he asked, voice deadly quiet. "I don't know," he didn't say. "Find out." James turned to Margaret, who'd followed in her own car. "Call our lawyer, now. I want to know who authorized this visit and why we weren't notified." Margaret nodded and stepped away, phone already out. James sank into a chair, head in his hands. "This is my fault. I should have been there, should have protected him." "Mr. Montgomery." "No." James looked up, eyes burning. "Someone is doing this. Someone called CPS. Someone sent that man to my house without warning. This wasn't random." His jaw clenched. "Richard Chen." Maria felt cold. "Your business partner?" "He's been trying to force me out, trying to prove I'm unfit, that I'm too distracted by Dylan to run the company." He laughed bitterly. The sound was hollow. "And now he has ammunition. My son, injured while in the care of an unqualified housekeeper." "I'm sorry," Maria whispered. "Don't." James grabbed her hand. His grip was almost painful. "Don't apologize. You saved my son. You brought him back to life. This is not your fault." A doctor appeared. Young, tired, scrubs stained with coffee. "Mr. Montgomery, Dylan's awake. The scan looks good. No bleeding, no fracture, mild concussion. We want to keep him overnight for observation, but he should be fine." The relief was so intense, James started crying. Right there in the waiting room, in front of everyone. "Can I see him?" "Of course. Follow me." In the hospital room, Dylan lay in a bed that was too big for him, looking small and pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. A bandage covered the cut on his temple. His eyes found Maria immediately. "You came," he said. His voice was rough, scared. Maria moved to his side. "Of course I came. Where else would I be? I thought, when the man came, I thought he was taking you away. No one's taking me anywhere. Promise?" Maria looked at James, who nodded. "I promise," Maria said. Dylan's hand found hers. "I'm sorry I fell." "Not your fault. That man scared you. He shouldn't have done that." "Is he coming back?" "No," James said firmly, moving to the other side of the bed. "No one is coming back. No one is taking Maria away, and no one is going to hurt you ever again. I promise." Dylan looked between them. "Dad?" James's breath caught. Dylan never called him Dad anymore, not since Melissa died. It had always been father or nothing at all. "Yes, buddy?" "I'm scared." "I know, me too." James took Dylan's other hand. "But we're going to be okay. All of us." Dylan's eyes drifted closed. The painkillers were kicking in. His breathing evened out. James and Maria sat there on either side of the bed, each holding one of Dylan's hands, not speaking, not needing to. But Maria couldn't shake the image of that black sedan, someone watching, waiting, taking photos. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Richard Chen sat in his office, phone pressed to his ear, listening to his private investigator's report. Through his window, the city lights were starting to come on, twilight settling over Los Angeles. "The kid's fine, mild concussion. They're keeping him overnight, but he'll be released tomorrow." Richard sighed, disappointing. Did we at least get what we needed? Photos, yes. The maid interfering with a CPS investigation. The kid injured while in her care. James Montgomery nowhere to be found during a crisis. It's all good ammunition. Good. Send everything to the board members. Anonymously, let them draw their own conclusions about James's fitness to lead. Consider it done. But boss, there's something else. What? The maid. Maria Santos. Her immigration paperwork is clean, too clean. She's legal, work visa, tax returns, everything in order. Richard frowned. So? So we'll need to get creative, plant something, maybe an expired document, or we could go another route. Criminal record, previous employer complaints, something. Do whatever it takes. I want her gone. Without her, the kid falls apart. Without the kid stable, James falls apart. And when James falls apart, You step in. Exactly. Richard smiled. Hung up, leaned back in his chair. The leather was buttery soft, expensive, like everything else in his office. Tomorrow he'd call an emergency board meeting, express concern about James's judgment, suggest that perhaps it was time to consider more formal succession planning. And James, distracted by his injured son and the CPS investigation, wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. Sometimes, Richard thought, the best way to win a war was to attack from the inside. Let your enemy destroy themselves while you just watched and waited and picked up the pieces. But Richard Chen didn't know Maria Santos, didn't know where she came from or what she'd survived, didn't know that a woman who'd hidden in a closet while soldiers killed her mother had learned to be very, very careful, had learned to notice things, to trust her instincts. That night, unable to sleep in the hospital chair, Maria went outside. Found a quiet corner of the parking lot. The air was cool, smelled like exhaust and fast food from the restaurant across the street. She pulled out her phone, called her cousin Mateo, who worked security at a hotel downtown. He knew people, knew how to find things out. Mateo, it's Maria. I need a favor. Anything, Prima. What's wrong? I need you to run a license plate. She gave him the number she'd memorized from the sedan, rattled off the numbers and letters. She heard him typing. Got it. Car's registered to a private investigation firm. Chen and Associates. Maria's blood went cold. Chen, the same last name as James's business partner. Mateo, can you find out who hired them? More typing, keys clicking through the phone. Looks like shit. They're on retainer with Montgomery Enterprises, through the executive office. Richard Chen? Can't tell for sure from this, but yeah, probably. Maria thanked him and hung up, stood there in the dark parking lot, pieces clicking into place. Richard Chen had hired a PI firm, the same firm that had sent a fake CPS doctor to the house, the same firm that was following them, documenting everything, building a case. He was trying to destroy James, trying to prove he was unfit, and he was using Dylan, using Maria as weapons. He was going to paint her as dangerous, unqualified, a threat to Dylan's well-being. And once Maria was gone, once Dylan spiraled again without her, James would fall apart, would be forced to step down. It was brilliant, ruthless, and it was working. Maria looked back at the hospital, at the lit window of Dylan's room where the boy she'd come to love was sleeping. No, she wouldn't let that happen. If Richard Chen wanted a fight, he'd get one. But first, she needed proof, real proof, evidence of what he was doing. She pulled out her phone again, started making calls. By morning, Maria Santos, former housekeeper from Guatemala, had assembled a team. Mateo and his security connections. A lawyer friend of a friend who specialized in corporate fraud. A journalist who owed someone a favor. She might not have power or money, but she had something better. She had the truth, and she was going to make sure everyone heard it. The hospital released Dylan the next day with instructions to rest, avoid screens, and follow up in a week. James drove them home, Maria in the back seat with Dylan. The boy was quiet, staring out the window. A bandage still covered the cut on his temple. Are you okay? Maria asked softly. My head hurts, but not too bad. He was silent for a moment. Then, Maria, that man, Dr. Saunders, he wasn't really from CPS, was he? Maria glanced at James, who met her eyes in the rearview mirror. No, Maria said. We don't think so. Then who was he? Someone who wanted to hurt your dad. Hurt us. Dylan processed this, his small hands clenched in his lap. Why? Because your dad is powerful, and some people don't like that. They want to take what he's built. That's stupid. Despite everything, Maria smiled. Yeah, it is. At home, Margaret had made chicken soup, real soup, homemade, with vegetables and soft noodles. The smell filled the house, warm and comforting. Maria could smell dill and pepper and carrots. Dylan ate a full bowl, then another half. Maria sat with him, and for the first time in days, she felt like maybe things would be okay. But that night, everything changed. James was in his office going through documents when his phone rang. An unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Hello? Mr. Montgomery, this is Thomas Walsh from the Board of Directors. I'm calling to inform you of an emergency meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Your attendance is mandatory." James's stomach sank. He set down his pen. "What's this about?" "I think you know." The voice was cold, professional. "We've received some concerning information about your judgment, about the welfare of your son, about your ability to lead this company while dealing with personal crises." Richard's behind this. "Richard has expressed legitimate concerns that we as a board must address. 8 a.m., Mr. Montgomery. Don't be late." He hung up. James sat there, phone in hand, heart pounding. This was it, the move he'd been expecting. Richard was making his play. He called his lawyer, then his accountant, then his head of security. By midnight, he had a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. At 1 a.m., he went to check on Dylan. Found Maria sleeping in the chair beside his bed, still dressed, hand resting near Dylan's, as if even in sleep she couldn't let him go. James stood in the doorway, looking at them. This woman. This stranger who'd walked into their lives 3 months ago and changed everything. What would happen to Maria when this was over? If he lost the company, lost everything, what would happen to the one person who'd saved his son? He couldn't think about that now. One crisis at a time. He quietly closed the door and went to his own room to prepare for war. The board meeting was exactly as brutal as James expected. He walked into the conference room at 7:55, dressed in his best suit, hair perfect, face calm. Armor. Richard was already there, sitting in James's seat at the head of the table. The message was clear. The king is dead. Long live the king. All 8 board members were present. No one would meet his eyes. The smell of fresh coffee filled the room, bitter and sharp. "Richard," James said, voice cold. "Get out of my seat." Richard smiled, slow, confident. "Actually, that's what we're here to discuss, whether this is still your seat." James walked to his chair, stood there, waiting. Richard held his gaze for 5 long seconds. Then, still smiling, he moved to the seat beside it. James sat, placed his folder on the table, looked around at the faces that were supposed to be on his side. "Let's begin," he said, voice cold. Richard took the floor, passed around copies of a report, photos, documentation, Maria with Dylan in the garden, Dylan in the hospital, statements from concerned parties about the housekeeper-turned-companion with no qualifications. "James," Richard said, voice dripping with false concern, "we're all worried about you, about Dylan. You've been through an unimaginable trauma, losing Melissa the way you did, and we want to support you, but hiring an unqualified immigrant to care for your mentally ill son, allowing a stranger to have this much influence, it shows a serious lapse in judgment. Maria has helped Dylan more than any professional we hired. She's a maid, James, a housekeeper. And yesterday, while she was supposed to be watching him, your son ended up in the hospital with a head injury." Richard's voice was smooth, reasonable, dangerous. "And this isn't the first incident. There have been 12 nannies, 9 therapists, all failures. But instead of seeking proper professional help, you've entrusted your son's care to an unqualified foreign national. That wasn't Maria's fault. Someone sent a fake CPS worker to harass us." Richard spread his hands, palms up, innocent. "Do you have proof of that?" James gritted his teeth. He didn't, not yet. The lawyer was working on it, but the fact remains, Richard continued, that under your watch, your son has been put in danger. Your focus has been divided. The company has suffered. We've lost the Shanghai contract because you weren't present to close the deal. The quarterly projections are down 8%. And now this, a child in the hospital because you trusted the wrong person. I trust Maria completely. That's the problem." Richard leaned forward. "James, we're not here to attack you. We're here because we care about you, about Dylan, about this company. And we think the best thing for everyone is for you to take a leave of absence. Let someone else run things while you focus on getting your son the help he needs. Someone like you. I've been helping already. It would be a natural transition. Temporary, of course, just until things stabilize." James looked around the table. "And you all agree with this?" Silence. Then Stephen Walsh nodded. Then another board member. Then another. Like dominoes falling. He was losing. Richard had gotten to them, convinced them, bought them probably. James opened his folder. pulled out his own documents. His hands were steady. He'd practiced this. "Before you vote, I'd like you to see something." He passed around papers, financial records, internal emails, documentation of shell companies and unauthorized transfers, wire receipts, bank statements. Richard has been embezzling from Montgomery Enterprises for the past 8 months, small amounts at first, buried in operating expenses and consulting fees to fake companies, but it adds up to just over $3 million. The room went silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming overhead. Someone's phone buzzed. The sound was deafening in the quiet. Richard's face went white, then red, then very, very still. "That's ridiculous. That's slander." "It's truth. And I have proof." James held up a USB drive. "This contains every transaction, every email, every fake company you created, every lie you've told, and my lawyer is filing a report with the SEC this morning." Richard stood up so fast his chair fell over. The crash echoed through the room. "You're lying. You're desperate, and you're lying." "Am I?" James smiled, cold, sharp, nothing like the warm man who read bedtime stories. "Try me. You can't prove any of this. Actually, I can. My head of security has been investigating you for 2 months, ever since I noticed the discrepancies. Ever since I realized you were trying to force me out." James stood, facing Richard across the table. "You wanted my company. You wanted what Melissa and I built. So you used my son, used his pain, used my grief. You sent that fake CPS worker. You hired the PI firm. You've been documenting everything, building a case to prove I'm unfit." Richard's jaw clenched. His hands curled into fists. "You can't prove any of that." "Can't I? Chen and Associates, the PI firm on retainer to your office, the same firm that employs Dr. Philip Saunders, who, by the way, isn't a real doctor. He's a private investigator you hired to harass my family." The board members were staring at Richard now. Shock on their faces. Disgust. "You tried to destroy my family," James said quietly. "Tried to hurt my son. Tried to take everything I've worked for. But you failed." Richard grabbed his briefcase. His face was red, veins standing out on his forehead. "This isn't over." "Oh, I think it is." James's voice was steel. "You're fired, Richard. Security is waiting outside to escort you from the building. And the SEC will be in touch." Richard looked around the table. At the board members who wouldn't meet his eyes anymore. At the empire he'd tried to steal, slipping through his fingers. He laughed. Harsh. Bitter. "You think you've won? Your son is still broken. That maid is still a nobody, and you're still the weak, emotional wreck who can't keep his personal life from destroying his professional one." "Maybe," James said, "but I'd rather be a good father than a good thief. Get out." Richard stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. His footsteps echoed down the hall. Getting fainter, James looked at the remaining board members. "Anyone else want to question my judgment?" No one spoke. "Good. This meeting is adjourned." He walked out with his head high and his hands shaking. In the elevator, alone, he let himself breathe, let himself shake, let himself feel the terror he'd been holding back. He'd won. But Richard wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. This was far from over. His phone buzzed, a text from Margaret. "Come home. Now." "ICE is here." James's blood went cold. He ran. When James got home, he found chaos. 2 ICE vehicles in the driveway, officers in his house, Margaret crying in the kitchen, mascara running down her face. "What happened?" James demanded. "Where's Dylan?" "He's upstairs." "He's safe," Margaret said between sobs. "But Maria. They took Maria." "Who took her? What are you talking about?" An officer appeared, tall, stone-faced, badge gleaming. "Mr. Montgomery? I'm Agent Torres. We received a report about an undocumented worker in your employ, Maria Santos. She's been detained by ICE pending deportation." The world tilted. James grabbed the counter to steady himself. "What? No, she has a work visa. I checked her documentation myself." "Sir, according to our records, her visa expired 8 months ago. She's been in the country illegally." "That's impossible." But even as he said it, James knew. This was Richard. This was his retaliation. He'd somehow gotten her records changed, made it look like Maria was illegal. "Where did you take her?" James asked. "Detention center downtown. She'll be processed and likely deported within 72 hours. Upstairs, a scream echoed through the house, high, terrified, heartbreaking. Dylan. James ran, took the stairs 3 at a time, burst into Dylan's room. The boy was on the floor, sobbing, surrounded by the toys Maria had made him, the grass bracelets they'd made together, the drawings they'd done. Everything scattered around him like the debris of an explosion. "They took her!" Dylan screamed. "They took her away!" James dropped to his knees, pulling him into his arm. Dylan fought him at first, hitting his chest, screaming. Then he collapsed against him, sobbing. "I know, buddy, I know. You promised. You said no one would take her away. I'll fix this. I promise I'll fix this." But even as he said it, James didn't know if he could. Richard had moved fast, too fast. While James was dealing with the board, Richard had made his move. Dylan pulled back, face red and wet. "You're lying. Everyone always lies. Mom said she'd get better and she didn't. You said Maria would stay and now she's gone. Everyone leaves. Everyone always leaves." The words hit James like bullets, each one finding its mark. He opened his mouth, closed it, had no idea what to say. Because Dylan was right. Melissa had promised she'd fight the cancer, had promised she'd be there for Dylan's first day of school, his 8th birthday, his graduation. All lies. Not intentional, but lies nonetheless. And now James had promised Maria would stay. Another lie. "I'm sorry," James whispered. "I'm so sorry." Dylan curled into a ball, making himself as small as possible. He rocked back and forth, humming that same 4-note melody Maria used to hum. And James knew. He knew that if Maria didn't come back, Dylan would disappear again, would retreat back into that dark place where no one could reach him. He had to fix this, had to bring her back, no matter what it took. At the detention center, Maria sat in a cold cell with 3 other women. The walls were gray, the floor was concrete, the air smelled like disinfectant and fear and unwashed bodies. She'd been fingerprinted, photographed, questioned. Her clothes taken and replaced with an orange jumpsuit that was too big, sleeves hanging past her hands. "Your visa expired," the officer had said. Cold. Professional. "Why didn't you renew it?" "I did renew it. I have the paperwork." "That's not what our records show." Because someone had altered the records, someone with power and resources. Richard Chen. He'd found her weakness, found the one thing that could get her removed from the Montgomery house without anyone questioning it: illegal immigration. In this climate, with this administration, it was the perfect weapon. Maria sat on the hard bench, head in her hands. Thought about Dylan, about the promise she'd made. "I'm not leaving. I'm never leaving." She'd failed him. Just like she'd failed her mother, just like she failed everyone she loved. No, Maria stood up. Walked to the small window that looked out onto the processing area, caught the eye of a guard. "I need to make a phone call." "You get 1 call, make it count." They led her to a phone. Maria dialed the number she'd memorized, Mateo's lawyer friend. "Julia Martinez." "Ms. Martinez, this is Maria Santos. We spoke yesterday. I'm being detained by ICE. They're saying my visa expired, but I know it didn't. Someone altered the records." "Slow down. Where are you?" The voice was calm, steady, professional. Maria told her. "Okay, I'm on my way. Don't sign anything. Don't talk to anyone without me present. I'll be there in an hour." "Thank you." "Maria, we're going to fight this. You're not going anywhere." Maria hung up, went back to her cell, sat down on the bench. The metal was cold through the thin jumpsuit. And for the first time since her mother died, she prayed, really prayed, to her mother's God, to anyone who might be listening. "Please, let me go back to him. Let me keep my promise. Don't let that little boy think everyone leaves." Julia Martinez was a force of nature, 5 feet tall, sharp as a knife, with a voice that could cut glass and a wardrobe that cost more than some people's cars. She walked into the detention center like she owned it, briefcase in hand, fire in her eyes, heels clicking on the linoleum floor. "I'm here for Maria Santos," she told the officer at the desk. "I'm her lawyer. Where is she?" "Detained pending deportation." "On what grounds?" "Expired visa." Julia pulled out a folder, slapped it on the desk so hard papers jumped. That's interesting, because according to these records from USCIS, her visa was renewed 8 months ago. It's valid for another 16 months. See? Right here. Stamp and signature. The officer frowned, looking at the papers. His eyes scanned the document. That's not what our system shows. Then your system is wrong, or someone altered it. Julia's voice was steel. Either way, you're holding my client illegally. Release her now. I'll need to verify. You'll release her now, or I'll have every news outlet in Los Angeles down here within the hour. I've already called 3. They're very interested in this story. She leaned forward. Imagine the headlines. ICE detains legal immigrant, ignores valid paperwork. Corporate executive uses ICE as personal weapon. How do you think that'll play? The officer's face went red. I'll need to call my supervisor. You do that. I'll wait. Julia sat down in one of the plastic chairs, crossed her legs, pulled out her phone and started making calls, loud enough for everyone to hear. 20 minutes later, Maria walked out. Free. Julia hugged her. Don't ever scare me like that again. How did you? Your cousin Mateo is very resourceful. He found the original filing, proved someone in the system had altered your records, and I made some calls, pulled some strings, called in favors. She smiled. Sharp. Satisfied. You're legal, Maria, completely legal, and we have proof that someone tampered with government records. Maria's legs nearly gave out. She grabbed Julia's arm. Thank you. God. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We still need to prove who did this, and my money's on Richard Chen. He's trying to destroy James, trying to get control of the company. Then we need to stop him. Julia's eyes glittered, and I know exactly how. That night, every major news outlet in Los Angeles received an anonymous package. Inside, evidence of Richard Chen's embezzlement, of his attempt to frame Maria, of his fake CPS visit, of his manipulation of immigration records, of everything. By morning, it was everywhere. Front-page news, trending on social media, cable news running it on loop. Montgomery Enterprises executive embezzles millions, frames, immigrant worker. ICE used as weapon in corporate power struggle. Billionaire's business partner orchestrates elaborate scheme to seize company. Richard Chen's career was over. The SEC launched an investigation. The board fired him. Criminal charges were filed, federal charges for tampering with government records. And James Montgomery, standing in front of cameras on the steps of his house, made a statement. Richard Chen tried to destroy my family, tried to hurt my son, tried to deport a woman whose only crime was caring about us. He used government agencies as personal weapons. He manipulated systems meant to protect people, and he did it all for money and power. James's voice was steady, strong. But he failed, because the truth always comes out, and the truth is, Maria Santos is a hero. She saved my son's life, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure everyone knows it. The crowd applauded. Cameras flashed. Questions were shouted. In the back, Maria stood with Dylan. The boy held her hand tightly, wouldn't let go. You came back, he whispered. I promised, didn't I? Yeah, you did. He hugged her, not tentative, not careful. A real hug, tight and fierce and full of desperate love. I love you, Maria. Maria's eyes burned. She knelt down, eye level with him, held his face in her hands. I love you too, Dylan, so much, and I'm not going anywhere. Ever. Promise? Promise. James turned from the cameras, saw them, saw his son hugging Maria like she was the only solid thing in a spinning world. He walked over, put his hand on Dylan's head, met Maria's eyes. Thank you, he said. For everything. Maria nodded. Couldn't speak. Too much emotion lodged in her throat. They went inside, all of them, together, away from the cameras and the questions and the chaos. Home. 6 months later, Dylan started 3rd grade at a new school, a small private school that specialized in helping kids process grief and trauma. He was still quiet sometimes, still had nightmares, still had days where he didn't want to talk to anyone. But he laughed, he played, he had friends, he was healing. Maria stayed. Not as a housekeeper, not even as a companion, as family. James had legal papers drawn up, guardianship papers. In case anything ever happened to him, Maria would have full legal rights to care for Dylan. She was listed as family, as next of kin. She cried when he showed her the documents, couldn't believe it. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," James said. "You're the reason my son is alive, the reason he's healing. Your family, Maria, and I want to make sure that's official." One Sunday afternoon, they sat in the garden, all three of them. Maria was braiding Dylan's hair while he complained it was too tight. James was reading a book, but not really, just enjoying the sound of them bickering. The smell of grass and flowers, the warmth of sun on his face. "Maria?" Dylan asked. "Yeah? Do you think my mom would like you?" Maria's hand stilled. She met James's eyes over Dylan's head. "I think," James said softly, "she'd be grateful that someone loves you as much as we do." Dylan nodded. "Good, because I want her to stay forever." "Forever?" Maria teased. "That's a long time." "I know, but you promised you wouldn't leave, and you keep your promises." Maria's throat burned. "Yeah, I do." They sat there as the sun set, painting the sky orange and pink and gold. A family, not by blood, but by choice, by love, by the million small moments that add up to something real. And in the main house, in James's office, hung a photo, the three of them in the garden, smiling, whole, under it a small plaque James had made. "Families are built on promises kept." Richard Chen sat in a federal prison cell, awaiting trial. Embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, tampering with government records. His lawyer said he'd probably get 15 years, maybe 20. He thought about James Montgomery, about how close he'd come. If that maid hadn't been so stubborn, if James hadn't found the financial records, if he'd underestimated them, thought a grieving widower and a housemaid would be easy to break. He was wrong. And now he'd lost everything, his freedom, his reputation, his wealth, his chance at power, all because he'd assumed that someone's value was determined by their position, their credentials, their power. He'd forgotten that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones you don't see coming, the ones you dismiss, the ones you underestimate, the ones who have nothing to lose and everything to fight for. Maria stood in the kitchen of the Montgomery house, making tamales, her mother's recipe. The smell filled the whole house, warm and familiar, masa and chili and cumin. Dylan sat at the counter, helping. His hands were clumsy with the corn husks, but he was trying, laughing when he got it wrong, trying again, getting better. "Tell me the story again," he said, "about the lighthouse keeper who lost his light." Maria smiled. "You've heard it 100 times. I know, but I like it." So she told it. Again. The story of the lighthouse keeper who thought he had nothing left to give until he realized his light wasn't gone. It had just changed form. Dylan listened, eyes bright. When she finished, he said, "I get it now." "Yeah?" "The lighthouse wasn't really about a lighthouse. It was about you and me." Maria's chest tightened. "Yeah, it was. And Dad, too, because he was in the dark, and we helped him find his light again." Maria had to turn away, pretending to check the pot on the stove. Her eyes were burning. James walked in, home early from work. He'd restructured everything after Richard was arrested, hired people he trusted, delegated more, worked from home 3 days a week. "Tamales?" he asked, smiling. "Maria's teaching me," Dylan said proudly. "Look, I only ripped 2 this time," James laughed. "That's great, buddy." He met Maria's eyes. "Thank you." "For what?" "For being here, for staying, for not giving up on us." Maria shook her head. "You've got it backward. You didn't give up on me." Later that night, after Dylan was asleep, James and Maria sat on the back patio. The air was cool, stars were out, the city glowed in the distance, but out here it was quiet, peaceful. "I've been thinking," James said. "About?" "Starting a foundation. For kids like Dylan, kids who've lost parents, who are struggling, who need help that's not clinical, not institutional, just human." Maria looked at him. "That's a good idea. I want you to run it." "Me, James, I'm not. You're exactly qualified, more than anyone. You know what these kids need, because you've lived it." James turned to face her. "Maria, you saved my son. Let's save more kids, together. Maria was quiet for a long time. The night sounds filled the silence. Crickets, a distant siren, the rustle of leaves. Then she nodded. Okay, yeah, let's do it. They shook hands, then hugged. Two people who'd been broken in different ways, now putting the pieces back together. Not just for themselves, for others. Because that's how healing works. You survive, then you help someone else survive. And slowly, little by little, the world gets a little bit less broken. Inside, through the window, they could see Dylan, sleeping peacefully. The nightmares held at bay. For now, that was enough. For now, they were home. And for the first time in years, that word meant something again. Home.